A four-man group dubbed the Ripper Crew terrorizes Chicago day and night, hunting women walking alone. Over the span of 18 months, as many as 17 women may be victims of a string of Jack the Ripper-style mutilations. This terrifying recap is guaranteed to send chills down your spine. So the Ripper Crew snatched Lorraine Borowski right out of her high heels. Every morning, the 21-year-old walked the 3 blocks from her apartment to open up the RE/MAX real estate office where she worked as a secretary. The office was in a strip mall in Elmhurst, a suburb outside Chicago. Around 8 a.m. on May 15, 1982, Lorraine walked out her front door. She got to work around 8:15, but she never made it inside. Before she could turn the keys in the door, 2 men grabbed her. Edward Spritzer and Andy Kokorales, 2 members of the sadistic Ripper Crew, a bizarre cult of devil-worshipping serial killers. Lorraine never saw them coming. They forced her into a waiting car and she was never seen alive again. Shortly after 8:30 a.m., her boss showed up at the office. The only sign of 21-year-old Lori were her empty shoes, keys, and makeup lying on the sidewalk in front of the door. While her worried coworkers were phoning the police, Lori was tied up in a seedy motel 10 minutes away. By that time, the rest of the crew had allegedly joined them. Andy's older brother, Thomas Kokorales, and Robin Gett. The crew took their time violating her, and then it got really bad. Andy took out a length of sharp piano wire, tied it around her left breast, and pulled until he cut it off. Ed hacked at her with an axe, finally ending the hours of torture they put her through. When she was dead, the men loaded her body into their red van and dumped her in the weeds on the outskirts of a nearby cemetery. She lay there for the next 5 months until a teenager stumbled on her remains in October 1982. By then, several other bodies had turned up with the same horrific telltale injuries, the work of the Ripper Crew. The ringleader, 28-year-old Robin Gett, once worked as a subcontractor for another notorious Chicago killer, John Wayne Gacy. Just like Gacy, Robin ran his own contracting business and surrounded himself with younger minions he could easily control. 21-year-old Ed Spritzer and the Kokorales brothers, 19-year-old Andy, and 22-year-old Tommy. They fit the bill perfectly. All 4 men waved goodbye to high school by the time they were 16. Tommy was just a few points shy of being mentally impaired. He and his brother Andy started doing some painting and odd jobs for Robin in 1980. Robin hired Ed in 1981 after meeting him at a Winchell's donut shop where Ed was working behind the counter. As Ed tells it, you're not gonna believe this, on his very first night out with Robin, they went out and picked up the Ripper Crew's first known victim, Linda Sutton, a 26-year-old single mother of 2. They forced her into the back of Robin's red van at gunpoint. It was like a portable torture chamber masquerading as a contractor's van. A fake plywood wall blocked the view of the back from the front. Behind that facade were handcuffs, piano wire, rope, and tools. It was May 23rd, 1981, when Ed and Robin grabbed Linda near Wrigley Field. They took her to a patch of trees outside the same seedy motel where they'd later murder Lorraine Borowski. Linda's time in the Ripper's clutches was short-lived, only a few hours. Her captors had no intention of keeping her alive. They wanted to scare her, torture, then kill her just for the thrill of it. And when her body was found 10 days later, her wrists were still handcuffed and the gag was still in her mouth. Both her breasts had been amputated. Robin seemed to have an almost supernatural hold over Ed, Andy, and Tommy. Cops would later say he made Charles Manson look like a Boy Scout. In the attic of his completely normal-looking suburban home, he created a small satanic chapel, complete with an altar draped with a red cloth and black candles. The walls were painted with red and black crucifixes. While his wife and 3 kids slept downstairs, Robin and his 3 loyal followers gathered up in the attic to enact some of the most gruesome cult rituals you can imagine. An unknown number of drugged, unconscious women allegedly lost their lives in that attic, while Robin read out loud from the Satanic Bible. This is where it gets even worse. Their breasts were removed with piano wire or a knife and then passed around as communion for each man to first masturbate into and then take a bite. The remainder would go into Robin's trophy box. One of the crew told police that he counted 15 breasts in that, and those were just the women who ended up at Robin's house of horrors. Nameless women who haven't been found found or identified. From the spring of 1981 to the fall of 1982, the crew stalked the streets of Chicago and its suburbs in Robin's red van, searching for women to grab. At night, in broad daylight, in back alleys, or in the city's nicest neighborhoods, no female was safe. 2 weeks after they snatched Lorraine Borowski from her office door in May 1982, they took 30-year-old Shuey Mack. She and her brother got into an argument on the drive home after a long night of work at the Mack family restaurant. Now, you know how fights between brothers and sisters can get way out of control. Well, her brother pulled over and Shuey got out of the car on the side of the road in the Hanover Park area. It was late, after midnight, and dark, but he left her there thinking that the rest of their family was in a car somewhere close behind them and they'd see her and pick her up. But the Ripper crew saw her first. Shuey's body was discovered 4 months later, dumped at a construction site in a suburban field. Like the other women, she'd been viciously attacked and mutilated. They grabbed Angel York in June of 1982. She was walking down the street when Robin's red van pulled up beside her. The men forced her into the back of the van and handcuffed her. They handed her a big knife and told her to cut her own breast or die. At the sight of her blood, Robin went into a frenzy, taking the knife from her to cut deeper while he masturbated into her wounds. What? Angel managed to claw her way out of the van and escape. She described the van and she picked Robin's face out of a photo lineup, but it went nowhere until it happened to another girl. In August 1982, Sandra Delaware's mutilated body was found on the banks of the Chicago River. A shoelace held her wrists together behind her back and her bra was tied around her throat. Just like the other victims, the 18-year-old's left breast was missing. The following month, yet another woman was found with the same injuries. Rose Beck Davis was a marketing executive in her early 30s when she was snatched off the street. Her body was found behind the stairway of an apartment building in the city's affluent Gold Coast neighborhood. A black sock was tied around her neck. Hatchet wounds covered her body. Her breasts were slashed to ribbons, and her stomach and chest had been pierced with an ice pick. In October, investigators caught a break. Another one of the Ripper's victims survived to talk about it. It was a miracle she made it. Beverly Washington was barely breathing when she was left for dead next to the railroad tracks in Chicago's Humboldt Park. Her left breast had been cut off. She lay there clinging to life for 4 hours until someone spotted her and called for help. From her hospital bed, she described the red van and the men who picked her up. But get this, Beverly was only the first person the Ripper crew attacked that day. After they dumped her by the tracks, they fired at 28-year-old Rafael Tirado and his friend in a random drive-by attack as these guys were making a call in a phone booth. There didn't seem to be any reason for it except they were hyped up on bloodlust after attacking Beverly. Rafael died for the thrill of the kill. His friend survived. 2 weeks later, on October 20th, patrol spotted their red van that they were looking for. Ed Spreitzer was behind the wheel. He told them that the van belonged to his boss, Robin Geck. Both Ed and Robin were hauled down to the station. Ed cracked first. Robin stayed cool. In fact, the man was just so damn pleasant, the police worried they had the wrong guy. Robin bailed out on October 26th. 4 days later, on Halloween, he and his wife and their kids abandoned their house, one with the horrifying attic, and they went to stay with his brother in a suburb nearby. But if he thought that he had seen the last of the police, he was very wrong. Ed was spilling the gruesome details of the crew's adventures throughout Chicagoland. As he talked, another name came up, Andy Kokorales. And when the cops dug into Robin, Ed, and Andy's lives, the investigation led them back to the seedy motel in Villa Park, where Linda Sutton's body had been found. It seems Ed, Andy, and Tommy had been living there for a short time. The manager of a motel like that no doubt sees a lot of weirdos in a typical week, but this guy remembered the crew because he thought that they were some kind of super weirdos, cultists, devil worshippers, and they brought a lot of women back to their adjoining rooms. But there was one other reason they stuck out in his mind. 2 of the men left a forwarding address when they left, which was super helpful of them. And the next stop was the Kokorales home, which is where they were forwarding their mail. So that's where police met the 4th member of the crew, Tommy Kokorales. Tommy was extremely helpful. Not only did he share even more gruesome details with the cops, but he also pointed to Lori Ann Borowski's picture and said, "Yep, that's the girl we buried in the cemetery." But between Tommy, Ed, and Andy, investigators had an avalanche of information about the bodies they'd found, and even more that they hadn't. Armed with those details, they arrested Robin again on November 5th. The Notorious Ripper crew was finally behind bars with a $1 million bond they'd never be able to afford. They weren't going anywhere. Exactly how many lives they took, we'll probably never know. Their confessions were convoluted and fluid, is a good word for it. They'd confess, then recant. They claimed that they were usually drunk or high and they couldn't remember where they disposed of the bodies or who the victims were. Many of them were sex workers, and they usually didn't catch their names before they ended their life. Robin never confessed to anything at all. In the end, all they could do was link him in court to the attack on Beverly, Washington. He was the only one who didn't go down for murder. But just hearing about what he was accused of was enough to shake the jury to their core. They gave him 120 years behind bars. He'll be up for parole in 2042. If he makes it that long, he'll be almost 90, so you could probably definitely take him down if you came face to face with him in a dark alley. But you'd have to fight a little harder if you got into it with Tommy Cocorales. At the age of 58, he was released from prison a few years ago. It's hard to believe, but thanks to some legal loopholes, a plea bargain, and some now defunct sentencing rules, he's as free as you and me, living in Aurora on the outskirts of Chicago. His brother Andy wasn't so lucky. He got the needle in 1999, the last inmate Illinois ever executed. Ed should have been the next to go, but after the death penalty was abolished and the then governor commuted all death row sentences to life in 2003. So that's where he is today.
And that's your recap.
Thanks for hanging out with us today.
If you like getting all the crime in half the time, go ahead and tap that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss a story.
We're here Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, but don't go away. Catch up on more recaps right here, right now.
Until next time, take care.